afternoon, everyone, and we hope that you're enjoying some good sunshine wherever you're tuning in from. It's time for Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the culture. We're here every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We started this journey with you in the midst of the global pandemic, and we've been here discussing the issues that affect our community, what that looks like, what that means, with two legal experts who do this every day, all day, and they're here to share insight, information, and tactical ways that we in our community can really be apprised of how the judicial system can work for us. So my name is Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. I welcome you to the show. My two co-hosts here, Edward Pichardo Esquire, Royce Russell Esquire, are in the building, and I'll let them say hello. Hey, Rich Russell, good afternoon. Great to see you here. Hey, Ken Clark Timbro, we appreciate you and all of those who are starting to tune in, and make sure you share the show and our broadcast if it's been beneficial to you in your learning and growing in community. So let me turn it over to my co-hosts for their welcomes. Señor Pichardo, buenas tardes.
Sí, muy buena tarde. Good afternoon. Hola, buenos días to the entire audience. Thank you for joining us today. As usual, as it occurs weekly, as I say, I believe you will find the content quite fulfilling and educational. So, looking forward to speaking to you.
Awesome. And Mr. Russell, over to you.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another segment of Speaking Legally, where the culture and legal meets. So let's get to the meeting place.
Well, we'll start culturally today because we have lost some hip hop legends in our community, and our hearts and prayers go out to each and every one. I'm praying for my friend Tashera Simmons, who is DMX's ex-wife, but still a good friend, and her children. They're still mourning. It's very public. Obviously, I heard all his songs, and the Rough Riders were out, and having his services in Brooklyn, just to see how he touched so many lives with his words, his lyrics, and just his life. That everybody has a story, everybody has a path that they go down, and we truly, as a community, we feel it when we lose someone who's been in the public eye. So I know, Ed, we were talking about that earlier, and there's some others, unfortunately, that have also transitioned.
Yeah, it seems like, some of these bad things come in threes, and you have DMX, you have Black Rob, and then most recently, you have Shock G, and these are guys that over the years I listened to, enjoyed their music, and to see them pass away in somewhat strange and tragic circumstances is unfortunate. You had DMX, I guess, cardiac arrest, fall into this coma, spent several days in the hospital. And then I heard with Black Rob, he was, had some sort of either renal, liver, or kidney failure of some sort and needed a transplant. And then I believe with Shock G, I think they found him in a motel or a hotel. He had been having some issues with substances, from what I understand. So, just really unfortunate. We got to, figure out a way to take care of our hip hop veterans, if you will. Something.
Well, and it's a bigger symptom and problem that we're facing just overall with things that unfortunately take us out of this world prematurely. From times besides what we talk about here on the show, and just how we take care of ourselves. And it goes back to some of the resources that are not always readily available in our communities, that are giving the right information, the capacity to deal with trauma, challenge, mental health. Substance abuse is real, mental health is real in our community. So there's so many issues that need our attention, and our hearts go out to everyone who's affected when we see someone publicly, as we have with these 3 deaths, lose their lives, and that it's once again an opportunity for someone to be the answer, that we can't wait for someone to come save us. We have to save ourselves and hold ourselves accountable on how we can protect and just take care of our own bodies so that we can be healthy before we get into everything else that's trying to take us out on a daily basis. So to your point, there's work to be done. And that's why we need all the brilliant minds wrapped around those issues and areas that need the right financial capacity. And that's what we're talking about when we get into who we elect. You know, we've had that conversation on this show. Who's going to represent our interests? Who's really going to look at the things that plague our communities in addition to the criminal justice reform that's needed? There are other portions of our services in our communities that are lacking. So thank you for sharing that. Mr. Russell, you want to say anything? Jump into the rest of our show.
No, I'm ready to jump in. Condolences to all the family members out there, and you have followers nationwide. And I would say the ceremony or the going away of DMX was something to watch. So if you can, take a little clip of it. You'll see some familiar faces and what I say a different place.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, Nathan and Kevin raised a good point that Black Rob needed treatment 3 times a week on dialysis, and he was also entitled to Medicare disability due to kidney failure. And why wasn't he getting his treatment is the question. So once again, healthcare disparities. It's real in our communities. There are things that we can prevent and lengthen the years of those in our community. So we can't solve all the world's problems on Speaking Legally every Wednesday, but we can highlight and amplify the areas that we can use our voice, that we can use our vote to make a difference and move us in a direction where we can have better opportunities for our community. So with that being said, there's a lot of discourse that's happening in the news on the variety of topics that we continue to see in our community. And I came across this particular clip with Angela Rye, and she was on Good Morning with George Stephanopoulos. I always get his name all tongue-tied. But it was interesting listening to this dialogue. So let me see if you can hear it.
Police from law could be leading. And that's where that number will go up from 52% to a higher number. If the American people actually see him saying, okay, I'll work with some Republicans in the Senate who are willing to do it, they can do the same thing on infrastructure.
Angela, it does seem like this issue I talked about with both Congresswoman Vance and Senator Scott, this issue of how much to shield police from lawsuits, what the standards should be for prosecution, that is going to be what determines whether we get a compromise or not.
It does. And I think what we have to look at is this verdict this week. With Derek Chauvin, this wasn't his first incident. It wasn't even his fifth. And we like to talk about bad apples a lot, but the issue is that the way the system of policing is currently set up, it doesn't punish bad systems or bad apples. Derek Chauvin, before George Floyd's 9 minutes and 29 seconds, knelt on the back of a 14-year-old Black boy for 17 minutes in 2017. In North Carolina, just this week, you have Andrew Brown, the father of 7 children, Ma'Khia Bryant in Columbus, Ohio. You have Miles Jackson in Columbus, Ohio, who was shot in an emergency room. Andrew Hill dropping off Christmas presents. Right? And the Columbus Police Department isn't about one bad apple. It's about an entire department. So we have to talk about qualified immunity without fighting with buzzwords, but really talking about how we solve for a system that by design from its inception was designed to capture and return enslaved people back to their masters. If we can't uproot what was intended, we will forever have this problem, and we have to be willing to have honest discourse.
There needs to be police reform. We all agree on that. At the same time, we can't have the White House at the podium every time there's an altercation, say that it is systemic racism, because it is not. There are instances that are of systemic racism, and they need to be addressed. There are instances where a cop simply makes, in a split-second decision, a very terrible call. And there are instances when the cop makes the right call and it's a tragic outcome. And, right now, every single altercation is being presented as systemic racism. And that's just not accurate.
Well, we're talking about, for example, with the Columbus Police Department, 30 Black people killed in the last 5 years. Systemic racism isn't something that you get to cherry pick and decide when you want to apply it. It means the system at its core is rotten. It means that it has to be reimagined and revisited, as Karen Bass talked about earlier in the show, who also is a champion and a hero on this issue, having the Marshall Justice Policing Act pass the House twice. What is incumbent upon, I think, especially people who are perpetuators of said system, is to understand understand that it's not just my experience. It's not just me being emotional. There is literally trauma that I carry in my body. I encourage you all to read a book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem, who talks about how we carry trauma in our bodies. White body supremacy, black body trauma, and police body trauma.
So I'm going to pause it there because that's some interesting dialogue that she's bringing up, and that really cues in to a special guest that we're going to have next week. So make sure you mark your calendars. Dr. Jeff Gardere is going to be joining us talking about the trauma that we experience as a community and that we carry. And, you know, she spoke about a couple of things there that I would love to dial back, because the pushback from the other panelists was, oh, the White House needs to stop going to the podium and calling every incident a subject of systemic racism. What say you, my legal experts?
Well, I'm not going to play the role of analyst to the news. We know that the news and the media is run by people that don't look like us. Therefore, the narrative and what is shown is going to be skewed. And part of that skewing is having sometimes guests and comments made that are extremely to the left or extremely to the right. It is very funny and interesting that one of the guests said, we can't have the president every time something goes wrong in reference to policing get on the podium. And I just wonder if she can count on her hands how many times that has happened in the past 10 years, that a president has to get on the podium to speak to police misconduct. I would say very few times a president had to speak to it, not because it didn't exist, because it is just not part of the American narrative that America wants to be portrayed out here. And it's something that from a national standpoint, people are not ready to deal with and ready to talk about. The cases that were cited were cases that may have made the news. There are every single minute and days of misconduct, whether it's being discourteous, whether it's being an illegal detention, stop, frisk, and excessive force that does not lead to someone going to the hospital. And those instances do not make it to the podium. And instances where there is death, if it doesn't make it through social media, they don't make it through the podium. All of this making it on the national scene, these instances are coming from social media. Social media is able to air it. It gets a lot of ticks, a lot of viewing. Media grabs hold to it. Then it becomes a question that makes its way up to the White House. The president and his cabinet, past President Trump and present President Biden, they're not looking for these instances so they could bring it to the light of American people. They're happening, and American people are bringing it to the light of the presidency.
I'm sorry, guy.
And so whether it is mentioned or not, it is there. And to tie it to institutional racism, we know it exists, and it would take, a long time and a whole lot of digging for America to really get to the truth of it. But it happens every single day. So this extreme left or right response that we can't have the president, why can't we?
And you're absolutely right. I mean, even under the African-American president, Barack Obama, he didn't come out every single time. He came out selectively. And then let's talk about that too, because many of these deaths, we find out about them well after they occur, because somehow, like Roy said, they make it on to the social media platform, and the regular media picks it up and broadcasts it to a larger audience. It's not, it's not like this stuff just, they try, what it is? It's the job or the self-imposed duty of the right to make any sort of exposure to these practices seem extreme, and that he can't come out every single time. He's not coming out every single time. That's absolute nonsense. You know, I mean, it's amazing how one side view things versus the other, and it's coming from a place of privilege, quite frankly. I mean, you know, since it's not happening to them, you know, they sit in disbelief that it's happening at all and don't want any light or attention to come to the issue at all, because God forbid we start criticizing the police who keep them safe. You know, the world is going to come to an end. We certainly don't want to criticize, you know, these police officers, and we don't want any scrutiny. And you see, she immediately talks about, oh, and there are cases where it's justified, but the result is bad, awful, but lawful, right? You know, we've heard that before on this show.
I'm sorry, Ed, to your point, one of the things is that we can extrapolate this and really talk about it in a very historical way, right? America doesn't like to see the bad of America. We could put policing on the side. We could put policing on the side. Is the president going to the podium and talking about homelessness in America? Are we seeing clips of that every day, every hour? The answer is no. Maybe if that was part of the formula that'll get us a result that we want to make sure that that doesn't exist in our country, then we should use it. When you talk about policing, and whether it's a split second, whether it is racism at its highest point, what we're talking about is accountability, because we know getting to the root of why it happens and rooting out why it happens is a job that will take 4 years to do. And we have just smelled the food. We haven't even tasted the food with what we see here. We've just smelled the food of this misconduct. Tasting it is something else. And so when I hear this and I look at this, what I'm saying to those out there is that how many people know about the case of Daniel Prude, where a man is unclothed in the middle of the street with a plastic bag over his head and he's suffocated. Mm-hmm. And the police walk away, not charged with anything. That's something that maybe the president should talk about, but we don't hear about it.
And it took a while for that to come out too.
Right. And so whether it's a split second or not, you have to be accountable. As a trial attorney, trying cases, if I make a split second decision in a question that I'm going to ask someone that's on the stand, that may make the difference between my client being convicted or walking out the door. And my malpractice insurance company does not want to hear that I made a split decision. They want to know whether or not you were within the professional guidelines to do that. And if you're not, lawsuit, here it comes. Accountability, here it comes. So whether it's split second, whether it took a long time, here it is. If you make that mistake, or if you do something intentionally, you need to be held accountable. I don't want them to switch the story as to how many stories out there of misconduct. I want the story to stay straight line, accountability, transparency. That's what we want. Accountability and transparency.
And it's amazing. I think it's very naive to believe that as a community, you know, the Black and Latino communities of color, that we don't scrutinize these incidents. I feel like we're harder on each other than anyone else. Anytime that I speak to another person of color about one of these incidents, we dissect these incidents, we talk about them, we ask a whole bunch of questions. Well, what was the person doing? What was happening? What time was it? What were the circumstances? Is there a video? Let's take a look at it. And then, you know, you see folks start to slowly come up with their conclusions. We don't just jump up and say, oh, he was shot and then that's it. You know, that's not what happens here. That's not what happens at all. The idea that our thought processes when it comes to these incidents are monolithic is just absolutely ridiculous. Just like the idea that there's one leader that represents all of us. All of these, you know, thought patterns are monolithic, stereotypical, and straight up racist. You know, whenever these incidents occur, in fact, what happens in many cases, what we experience is a spinning of the facts, video fragments being offered to the public to offer one-sided views of what occurred. You know, like for instance, the other day with the brother who I believe got shot in his car by the police, and the family is like, they show like this snippet of the incident, and that snippet itself shows him being basically executed. You know what I mean?
And you know, and to add insult to injury, what police are focused on in some of these cases is just irrelevant to the process of being arrested and carrying out their lawful duty. So let's go full circle. Let's look at Dante Wright. One of the things that the police officer was yelling at Mr. Wright, and we could talk about, to me, I'm using the word Mr., but it was, he could be called Baby Wright. He's 20 years old. You know what I mean? He hasn't really, he hasn't earned the right to even drink. He's earned the right to go to war for America and maybe earn the right to vote, but he's still a baby. He's 20 years old. He graduated college at 21, 22. So he's still a baby. One of the things that the police officers were concerned about, to bring this full circle, is him putting down his phone. Why is that an issue? Like, the phone is not a taser. The phone is a vehicle to transmit communication. What is it about that phone that you need to be fixated on, that you have to yell, put down the phone, put down the phone? Why is that the issue and the problem? That creates the escalation. Because if I'm on the other side, why do I need to put down my phone? We know it's not a crime to have your phone. As a matter of fact, if I'm a police officer and your hands are on your phone, guess what? I know where your hands are. And it surely ain't on a weapon because I can see it on your phone. But that type of logic doesn't exist. It goes to something that is like what I call a red herring, collateral, not even really relevant whether he has a phone in his hand or not.
And that's what Angela was talking about in the clip, like this inherent fear of Black people, Black men in particular, driving, Black boys in particular. It's like this is what we talk about with systemic racism and the things that just happen. It's just built on. So you could tell the other panelist was really annoyed at, why is the president speaking? Why are we all talking about this? There's, there are bad instances, but every cop that's a good cop that took an oath to do their job, they know the truth because they get up and put their life at risk every day to honestly serve and protect. And they know what exists. And the blue wall of silence is what really needs to come down in order for reform to happen. There are pieces to the legislation that's been presented, but it's going to take buy-in because there was also a news clip that there are large numbers of retirement now for those in law enforcement. They're saying, we're leaving the force, we're getting out. It's like almost, we're going to let this just turn into Armageddon. Is that what we're saying? What we're saying is if you're going to do the job, why can't the job be equitable? Just like the video we showed last week when a white man with a gun, visible, threatening and yelling at the cops, gets to tell the cops to put their gun away and then takes off and lives. Come on, family. Like, these are the things that make us need therapy and why Dr. Jeff Gautier is going to be here next week to talk about it, because it's a lot to see over and over again. It's a lot to witness. And every family in the last 6 months that has been affected, did they choose to be in the news? Did they choose to have to share with the world that they've lost their loved one? No, it's a problem. If only one segment of the community is in all of these numbers, there's a problem. Houston, there's a problem. I'll take it back to Sesame Street days. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza. Yes, Mr. Russell.
On the other side of the coin, and I preach this every day, all day, whether it's by book or whether it's verbally, is that we meaning people of color, need to know how we're viewed, and we need to be accountable for our actions and inactions. And so, by no means should Brother Wright be dead. By no means. If there was a warrant that existed and he failed to understand that it was out there, to me, that's a problem. You can't fail to understand that you missed a court date. You can't fail to understand that you may have a warrant. You can't fail to understand that I'm going to pass this red light in a town that doesn't even want me there. It has nothing to do with his case. I'm just giving an example, right? You can't fail to understand that I can't have bags of weed in my car. You can't fail to understand that when I ask this police officer a question, which I should be able to ask, that there may be an adverse reaction. You need to know that. You need to be prepared for that. And I'm not saying don't ask. I'm saying be prepared for it. Understand that it exists. Understand it from the top to the bottom. You don't have to accept it, but you need to understand it as you maneuver and make your way through society.
Well, as you said something key. You said understand, and making and going to Dr. Grant's point. You know, the sister said earlier, irrational fear, irrational, because the fear that these police officers and others have of black males is completely irrational. It's not rooted in science. It just has no factual validity. You know, you're in fear of me, but at the same time, you're rooting for a man who's 6'7" running down a wooden court tossing a basketball. I mean, you don't seem to be afraid of him, but you're afraid of me. I mean, it just, and then going back to understand, right? This young man.
Let me stop you there. They actually are afraid of the 6 foot guy running.
Oh, when they don't know he's a pro player. No, and I understand that, and when they happen to recognize him, I understand that fully.
That's right.
Now, what I was getting to is with the understand point is this young man. You know, he's about 20, I believe. It has been scientifically shown that the brain is not fully developed at that age, right? And thus, then you get to this point of where do you get to the point where culpability is held so strongly that it should be put forth to justify the death of this young man over a warrant? Young people, there's a lot of things that young people fail to do. They fail to submit their college applications on time, even though there are severe consequences to that once their parents find out you didn't turn that thing in on time. You know, just a number of other life obligations, small ones, if anything, because they don't have to worry. A lot of them don't have to worry about paying rent. They don't have to worry about paying a mortgage. You know, only thing they have to worry about is a damn cell phone bill most of the time, and then not even that. You know, their homework, stuff like that. You know, meanwhile, an adult has all these other responsibilities, right? So then we talk about culpability. We talk about at what point is this young person to be held culpable and accountable, and to what level? And this idea of, you know, okay, he missed a court date, and now we're going to, you know, do these things to you and lock you up, versus, listen, we see here on the system that you forgot to show up in court. You know, you need to go down there tomorrow, and if you don't, then, you know, that's the way this stuff has to be treated here. This society is far too punitive, and it's even more punitive in ways to young people than anywhere else on the planet. We have the highest incarceration rates out of some countries on the planet, and yet at the same time, speaking of homelessness, we're the richest country on the planet with the most reserves. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Speaking to your point, Ed, I mean, what I hear you saying in a more, you know, just kind of like read in between the lines, and if I have it wrong, please help me out, is that this young man was 20 years old.
20.
That means in my brain, he is still considered a juvenile.
Yeah.
He's still, like, unless you graduate college, you still considered a juvenile in the world of criminal justice. And that's why you have around the United States of America all these campaigns that speak to raising the age of a juvenile to 17, 18. Some are going beyond 18 years old because you spoke as to the frontal lobe and not being prepared to be institutionalized. with men and how we treat children, juveniles. I know the word sounds like maybe it doesn't fit, but when you talk to someone that is 21 years old, you talk to someone that's 20 years old, 19, 18, 17, 16, you can tell that the word juvenile fits. And so when you look at the crime and you look at the punishment and you look at the treatment, there needs to be a change. And when I say treatment, I'm not limiting it to treatment of once you may be found convicted or you're incarcerated. I mean treatment in that police talking to and speaking to someone that is 20, 21, 19, 18, 17, 16 years old. That is a different, you should have a different way to speak and interact with that person versus someone that is 32, 33, or 34. It still all should be courteous, and we should still all go home with every part of our body intact. But it starts with the conversation of who you're talking to.
And he was on the phone with his mom.
mother.
So why couldn't this cop say, "Can I get on the phone with your mom?"
Right, Mrs.
Right. And talk to his mother.
Do you know that your son missed? Mrs. Wright, do you know your son missed a court date? What? I didn't even know he had a court date. Boy, wait till you get home. All right, hey.
Or maybe. Listen, there's so many options here, Miss Wright. Is there a way for you to come over here and come over here right now and get him? We'll wait for you.
Right. We don't want him. We don't want him driving anymore.
We're gonna follow the car home and make sure he gets home. Something. Something less than just killing his boy.
Or Mrs. Wright. What? You didn't know he had a warrant? Oh yeah, he had a warrant. And you know what Mrs. Wright's gonna say on the other end. And then the police go, "Hey son, you know what? I was gonna give you a ticket, but I know you got enough problems. You go home. I think I've done my damage. Talk to you later." Right? If you understand culturalism, if you understand who we are as a people.
But here's the thing. To your point, one, if you're not culturally relevant, policing communities with people that don't look like you, there's a problem of even having that cultural conversation, right? Because there was a time when cops would say, "Look, I know your mother. Don't let me go and call or ring the bell and let your mother know what's going on." But let's back it up to the fact that the maturity level is what it is for someone who is 20, 19, even 21. Where are the resources in our community for the educational component, right? What are our kids exposed to? What things are they able to wrap themselves around that's positive that prevents them from even being in a situation where they can get a warrant? So that's why this is a long conversation, right? It's a long, multiple issues that we have to face. But in this case, when we're talking about criminal justice and we hear people saying, "Oh, well, there's no systemic racism." Come on. Like, where are you living? And Raymond had a point, and I want to make sure that you all get a chance to make a comment on what he's saying. He's saying there's no fear. It's a part of the police defense narrative. They control the situation with their aggressive commands, which clearly doesn't show fear. Fear only comes into the equation when they shoot us and justify it by claiming fear. So that's an interesting way to look at it because, in your book, Mr. Russell, you talk about the kinds of cops and what things drive their stops. But the fear is, if they don't shoot us, if we don't shoot them, they're going to shoot us or going to kill us. Or there's just that fear is real. And then he has one more, and I'll let you jump in. He said, all these situations illustrate the systemic aspect of racism and how police abuse does not protect the Black community.
Well, I would agree with the second statement wholeheartedly. And with the first statement, I would just add and interweave in between the statement is that nothing is always right. Like, I don't always not listen to you guys, right? I don't always dress a certain way. There's no such thing as an always. So when we look at a pie chart, I think fear has a proportion, whether it is 5%, 10%, or 100%, in reference to dealing with folks of color. I don't think it's the whole thing because that's just an easy out. And I hear what he's saying. There's no easy out on this, right? Mm-hmm. But if we look at police as more as a quasi-military force in the community, then we can get back to that aggression, trained aggression, that ability to disassociate your humanity with the people that you're supposed to protect and serve. And we see that in terminology that goes throughout the criminal justice system. The defendant, I have to defend the charges against me, right? You're innocent until proven guilty, but yet they call you a defendant because you got to defend charges that are filed against you. That's a walking contradiction.
Even though the prosecution has the burden of proof, right?
Right. So that's crazy mindset right there. And then when you look at the terminology that court officers and police use in reference to the person that is accused of the crime, what do they call them? They call them perpetrator, a perp, right? That's not Mr. Russell that committed the crime. He's a perp, right? So once again, the disassociation of humanity. So it is easier to deal with someone that you call a perp, piece of property, than someone that you have to call by their name. And that's why say their name. You know, I often wonder why people walk around and they say their name, say their name, say their name, say their name. And I came to a couple of kind of like in my brain explanations, but I was having a conversation with a journalist, and you know, the enlightenment that she gave, she said, this is why they say the name. They say the name because that is a person, and saying the name means something. It means respect to the family. It means accountability, ownership. Say the name. Don't say the defendant or the accused or the assailant or the alleged criminal. No, that's a person. And when you have to call that person by their name, first name and last name, that brings a different sensitivity to the forefront. That is like, you know, and I'll get a million calls for this. That's the difference between walking up to a young lady who wearing her hair in a natural and how you talk to that person, as opposed to walking up to a young lady whose hair is not a natural. You talk to that person differently. That's a cultural tip for the day.
We're going to leave that one alone, and we're going to move on to what we're talking about, building on age, right? And what it means to be mature, not mature, still developing, being able to have the same courtesies that are afforded other communities when children make bad choices and decisions, and all they get is a reprimand. You better not do that again, Charlie. Like, you know, I'm going to tell your father, I'll see him at golf on Saturday. So we need the same sort of courtesies, but now there's some laws being enacted or proposed about raising the age of what we're doing with parole and, you know, being able to be tried. So I want both of you to address that, because unfortunately, we have a higher propensity in our community to deal with these issues, whether it be your own family, whether it be friends, whether it be others in the community. So you really need to know what's being proposed that will be put into law, because once again, this circles back in being engaged civically. Who are your elected officials? Who are the DAs? Who are the judges? Who are the people that are making these proposed laws become law? And what should it be? And where is your voice in that conversation?
Well, the great thing is when in recent years, there was a very good change in the law with respect to raise the age, because up until about a year and a half, 2 years ago, you had 16 and 17-year-olds being tried in adult court for felonies. And it was, you know, and it was crazy. It was like, what's happening here? And so now 16 and 17-year-olds, you know, if they get charged with a felony, what happens is that they have the opportunity to still go to family court, except in instances where it's a violent felony. And then even then, the Supreme Court has set up what's called a youth part for the handling of that. And even then, defense attorneys have a right to argue, and the court will closely scrutinize whether that case should even still remain in that youth part in Supreme Court. So, you know, this is a favorable change because, you know, New York was one of the few states that, you know, was sending children of this age to adult court. You know, and the big difference is that when a young person is in family court, they're at that point, the disposition, the sentence by the judge is one that's more tailored towards providing services, you know, counseling, helping out that family, straighten out whatever issues they have so that this young person doesn't reoffend. So, this is big. And as Royce mentioned earlier, and I share this opinion with him, that age needs to go up even higher. For me, you still aren't an adult at 18. Yeah, maybe, the Army takes you and sends you off to war. Maybe you get to vote, but you don't get to drink though, right? You don't get to consume alcohol until you're 21. For some reason, you're not responsible enough to make those types of decisions.
You're not responsible enough to even smoke cigarettes, which affects your health.
Pa' que tú veas.
Right? Because you don't know what's good for you, right? Alcohol, you don't know what's good for you. Now, we also have to put in play, Ed, is that all of this raise the age, that started in 2017, and many states are doing it. New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, they even taking the ball even further and trying to get it past 18. But remember, this all happened because someone died, right? It was the death, and it was the mental wear and tear, and what we saw happen to juveniles when they were housed with adults, but in solitary confinement and things of that nature.
But if I may, I want to say this one thing, because definitely that solitary confinement is an issue. But I still will say that, no matter what, even in those juvenile detention facilities, the government has to work much harder at making those places a lot safer.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some of the brutal attacks I've seen, even in those juvenile facilities are horrendous. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, man. Many years ago, when I first started my career as a lawyer, in Racine, Wisconsin, by the way, I was representing juveniles. I had a colleague who had just moved from New York to Wisconsin, and we had a very interesting discussion because he was telling me about a lawsuit that was filed by Legal Aid many years ago to remove juveniles from incarceration facilities that had adults, right? And he said something to me. He said something that resonated with me. He said, you know what? He started witnessing more violent incidents occurring to young people charged with, crimes at some of these juvenile detention facilities are coming to harm because for some reason it was kind of a Lord of the Flies kind of phenomenon, if you will, versus, with the adults. And I'm not advocating, by the way, that young people should be in with adults. Absolutely not. But even in those facilities where it's all young people and all juveniles in the same age, we still have to take steps to protect some young people from others, because you also have an issue of environment and experiences and so forth. You know what I mean? And just because me and you are charged with the same crime doesn't mean we should be locked up in the same facility. You know what I mean? It's
one thing I would add to the conversation, and I think this brings home the point, because I still think there, as Ray said, aggressiveness, as we've also said, racism, all wrapped up in this equation, is what would have happened and what should have happened to Brother Wright had the system showed that he had a family court warrant. That speaks different than a criminal court warrant.
Yeah.
Or do they have the technology to distinguish on their computer whether or not it's a family court warrant, whether or not it's a criminal warrant? And the question becomes, and I think I know what the answer is for me, but I think this is a personal answer and it's a personal question to answer. Would it have changed the circumstances if it showed family? That means, would the officer acted differently, conducted themselves differently? We don't know the answer to that as we sit here currently. And my answer is no, but maybe there's a fraction out there that says, look, had I saw that it said family court warrant, then my reaction would have been different.
I would listen. I mean, you would hope that he would have been treated differently, but unfortunately, the trend is going in the opposite direction. And I don't know if we're ready to speak to this, but what I mean is that you had a very disturbing decision come down from the Supreme Court recently in a case called Jones v. Mississippi. It was a 6-3 where the conservatives on the court decided to uphold, or rather strengthen, this idea of juveniles being sentenced to life without parole. It's just absolutely obscene. The court was actually going in the opposite direction before this conservative turn on the court. And what do I mean by that? There were two previous decisions where the court bolstered the idea that before a judge sentences a juvenile to life without parole, that there should be some sort of finding of permanent incorrigibility, or some permanent corruption, meaning that you want to at least leave open the window for this young person to maybe 30 years later, for instance, be able to apply to the court to gain their freedom. Say if after 30 years they've shown that they earned 2 degrees and have not committed any violent incidents while incarcerated and have basically redeemed themselves, have maybe apologized to the victim's family or something like that. And I say victim's family because in many cases you don't get sentenced to that type of lengthy sentence except in the case of some sort of death or murder or something like that. And so, we seem to be going in the opposite direction. I know a lot of people say, oh, we don't want to stack the court, but listen, I think it may be necessary here. I don't think we should continue to sit back while this court that's stacked with these conservative judges is allowed to make these conservative decisions that we're going to have to live with, because these are lifetime appointments. These folks, Brett Kavanaugh was the one who wrote the decision for the court. Trump appointee. He's young enough where he's going to be on there pretty much for possibly the rest of our lifetimes. I mean, I'm going to try to take care of myself, of course, and observe some of that, the healthy advice that Dr. Grant gave earlier about us black men taking care of ourselves. But damn, man, I don't want to be like old and gray and sitting in a chair still seeing this cat on that screen issuing these conservative opinions, man. Calling up Royce, be like, yo, Royce, you heard that, man? You heard what they doing to us,
No, we don't want that. But that again, how many times do we have to say the same thing about watching what's going on? We're playing checkers and other people are playing chess. Like, you have to be involved. Who is getting appointed? Look at all the appointments that happen. And I don't think our community really understands what the implications of that is moving forward, where the legal meets the cultural and what that looks like for us. So, and Sonia, I hear you on that comment, sis. The answer is no. Let's cut to the chase. The systematic aspect of racism as reflected in the police and even the legal system is based on the perception of Black people being deemed guilty and not treated as human. The founding of this country supported this notion. So even when you comply with an officer, he approaches the situation that you're up to no good, whether you're in a suit or a hoodie. We hear you, Raymond. We hear you.
I think that's chapter 4, chapter 5 in cardiac arrest.
And cardiac arrest, it is.
I'm with you, baby. I'm with you all the way.
That's exactly what you cover in there. And how can we use what we have to do our best to get home safely? There's no guarantee. Just like you say in your book, Mr. Russell, there's no guarantee that if you do everything and use all the tactical guides, that you'll still make it home alive. But the chances are better. And if you make it home and need to actually file a lawsuit, that you have the things in place to make it easier for attorneys like Mr. Russell and Mr. Pichardo to make that happen. We have to keep talking about it. We have to not only say their names, we have to do the work that's involved with really getting the reform, looking who's on the bench. Because if that goes through, what does that say? There's no hope for someone if they make a bad choice at a young age, that they can't after 20 years or 10 years or 30 years do something else. we're sitting as judge and jury like that? Really?
And
So-
in that Supreme Court case, apparently the family of the victim was also asking that he be released. I mean, it's just,
Wow.
it's insane. You know, you have this idea that it's okay for you to lock up some young person for the rest of their life without really making some special findings. Because at the end of the day, under the U.S. Constitution, there's an 8th Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, when does it become unusual? How can you speak to somebody after, they're a young person, they committed this crime when, and apparently my understanding is the facts in this case were that this young man had been in a really rough and tough environment as a child, had been beaten, I think, by his grandfather and had gotten, I guess, beaten again. And, he retaliated, killed, his grandfather and ended up incarcerated. But with time, he was able to, quote unquote, rehabilitate himself and do some wonderful things and really was able to redeem himself. And, that a person like that, who you can say, listen, really study the case and study the history and realize that this person didn't really have much of a shot, and now they've changed. And, we need to say, hey, listen, let's give you the ability to gain your freedom once again,
And as you stated before, when you raise the age, right, you have apples with apples. And although, as you said, places are dangerous in and of itself, but it's about the resources and it's about redemption.
Yeah.
It's about changing a mindset. It's about having a mentorship. It's about getting a second chance at life. We know here in New York, there is this form that you can file as an adult called Certificate for Relief of Civil Disability, which allows you to apply for state jobs and government jobs, even though you have a criminal record, which speaks to redemption. And if we're going to redeem anyone, we have to redeem the young because of the immaturity that comes with being young, the lack of wisdom. And Raise Your Age is one of them. I hope more states endeavor to do so. If you live in the state and you do not find that on your books, because it's something about trending and being popular. You have a movement and several states will follow through. And then when the movement moves away, it's back as business as usual. So, Oklahoma may not have this. Iowa may not have this. And if they don't have the legislation of that nature on the books, then take it from me that's a place to start, right? That's a place to make something happen that can empower your community directly or indirectly and change the scope and how the criminal justice system works. And I implore you to do so.
And what you have, I think, in many cases is you have the movement, and then you have this reactionary trend that follows the movement. One of you mentioned earlier this idea of cops retiring, and so
I did.
The whole thing is, we're going back to this fear thing where, they're gonna leave, we're not gonna be safe. They highlight some ultraviolet incident as an example of how society is going down the drain. We need more cops. We need tougher laws. We need to lower the age. We really need to lock these people up. And next thing you know, it's an opposite trend. You have children one moment being treated as children, the next minute, oh no, we got to treat them as adults because you heard about that case where that kid did this and that. And that's another thing. They take isolated cases and characterize them as if it's the trend. It's kind of like manipulation and that spin of facts when the numbers don't speak to that, right? This idea that, there's a bunch of homelessness and this and that, and society is out of whack. I mean, and listen, and to a certain degree, sometimes we all can become victims of this, right? Because a lot of it is a matter of perception, right? There's this huge debate right now about how safe the subway is, right?
When ridership is down and nobody's on the subway.
Yeah, so they fighting over that, right? Them folks up top fighting now because You know, one group of them is saying, nah, we need you to ride that subway so we can start making back that money to pay
right.
for it.
Mhm.
And then you got the other side say, oh, no, it's safe. It's out of control. Then you got a third group saying we need more cops down there on the subway. You know, you got these incidents of people being pushed over the platform, but nobody's talking about mental health services for those folks, housing for
That's
the
the
homeless
point.
that live down there. You know,
Hello?
I mean, all of that is missing from the discussion.
So we would be here for a whole nother show just talking about that and the challenges and the disparities. And the truth of the matter, there's so many issues that need our attention. And I'm always holding our elected officials accountable. Where are we spending the money? Where are we spending the money for the mental health? Where are we spending the money for the homeless? Like, where's the money really going? Follow the money. And you follow the money, you see what's going on and what's happening, because everything builds. There's not these isolated instances of police brutality and homelessness just happening, you know, no, everything connects with resources, with how people are treated, with the disparities that we see that we don't see in certain communities. So if it can happen successfully here, it can happen successfully here. But it's a choice of where we put that resource. It's an intentional space that's created for the success of a community. So either we're investing in it or we're not. So to be continued. There's so much that we brought up today, but really wanted to just highlight the conversation around what we see happening, this raise the age. Be aware, as Mr. Russell said, it might not happen in Oklahoma. It might happen in another state. Where are you? What's going on? How much do you know about the laws that are being passed, the laws that are being proposed, the people that are running? This is an election time, not just the general election that we just came through. It's an election time. In New York, there is a special election come June 22nd. They've changed the way the game is played with ranked choice voting. You have to stay woke. Everyone's talking about get woke. You have to stay involved and engaged. Figure out what's going on. How do you do this ranking? How do I participate? What's really at stake? What offices are being elected in this season before we get to them being elected again in another general election? We cannot sleep right now. We see what COVID-19 has created, all of the additional trauma and stress in our communities. If we haven't learned anything in the last year plus, we have to know about the facts, about the resources, and as a community where the legal meets the cultural, how do you connect with legal experts that can guide you through the challenging times that we're in? That's why we started Speaking Legally. That's why our two legal experts are here. They're not just pontificating about the issues. They do this every day, advocating for the justice and the rights of their clients in our community. So no need to go anywhere else when you have people who can provide that sort of space for you so that you can get some semblance of justice. We're going to hope and pray, like Reverend Martin Luther King said, that the arc bends. We hope it bends in the right direction as we move forward to reform and doing the things that we need that arc of justice to provide for our communities. So last comments before we close out, and next week, make sure you tune in and bring a friend. It's sure to be a fun-filled show with America's favorite Dr. Jeff Gardere, as he calls himself, America's favorite psychologist. So we're going to get into the trauma of how we deal with it and some of the tactical ways that he's been consulting on national news to help our communities get through the challenges that we're seeing. So over to you, Mr. Russell, and then you, Senor Pichardo, for final comments.
Well, I do want to send my condolences to the NYPD police officer who was killed on duty while he was waving cars away from an accident that took place on one of the highways in New York City. He was waving away cars while the police was attending to another accident, and someone drove into him, killed him, kept on going. So my condolences to that family. But staying on the wavelength of being woke, when we look at what happened in that incident, the person was driving while intoxicated, and the person allegedly driving while intoxicated and allegedly was driving with a suspended license. So where does the woke part come in? If you know this has happened, and you know police officers love police officers, which I understand fully, and I want them in my community policing the right way, that you know that there's going to be an uptick in stopping people while they're driving if their license is suspended, if there is something wrong with their vehicle. You know that there's going to be an uptick in DWI, sobriety tests. You know there's going to be an uptick with that. So let's be wise. Let's don't drive with a suspended license. Let's don't say I'm okay after you had a couple of drinks, or maybe you smoke because it's legal, but now you're in a car and you're driving, you might be impaired. Stay woke, look at the news, look at what's going on. For every action, there's a reaction. And this will be the reaction to the death. But my condolences once again.
And what I would say is, in terms of following the theme of woke, please don't get taken in terms of your selection of a candidate by who's sending the most flyers to your home, who's appearing on TV the most because they have the money to pay for the commercials. More likely than not, this is somebody that doesn't share your class interests and has more money than you can ever hope to have in a lifetime and shares very little in common with you. Make sure that you read that candidate's background to see if that person shares the same interests you do and is actually going to benefit you and your community. So please be careful of who attracts your attention as a candidate in these upcoming elections. I will leave it at that.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank our viewers. Again, you all have been so active in the chat on our multiple channels where we're streaming. Thank you, Raymond. I truly appreciate your input. Richard, Kevin, both Kevins. We have two Kevins in the building. And Monica, Sonia, Ken. And Monica, you asked what inspired us to do this. Part of what I do is share knowledge and information. And when we were talking about how can we have some sort of response? A lot of people were panicking when COVID-19 happened and didn't know what to do. And this is one of multiple shows that I produce every week because we need answers, and we need answers from experts. And Mr. Russell has written a book. Cardiac arrest needs to be in every school. It needs to be a part of curriculum. He is about to launch the workbook component to that because knowledge is power when it's applied. And these shows allow the knowledge to be applied for you to get the information from experts, and then you can form your own form of action and how you want to process the information. But we fail from a lack of knowledge. So I'm always about teaching, always about sharing, and making sure that our community can become better as a result of anything that I'm involved in. And that's the same for Mr. Pichardo and Mr. Russell. We're committed to our community. We didn't just wake up black. We've been black all our lives. Right? This is what we do. It's who we are. It's a part of community. And Mr. Pichardo brings a unique perspective because he's able to bring in some of our Latin culture because we're all one. And we're dealing and seeing these disparities in our communities. And we appreciate the allies that stand with us. But at the end of the day, nobody feels it like a black mother. Nobody knows it like a black father. Nobody understands it like an elder who has witnessed years and years, decades and decades of hope, and then wow, and then hope. But I will continue to say hope springs eternal. Some of my co-hosts might differ, but we're going to continue doing our job to bring you the information that helps impact our community. Speaking Legally is where the legal meets the cultural. Share it with everyone. We're here 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've been committed to being here for a full season. This is our second season, and who knows where it goes. Byron Allen, where you at? We ready? All right, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Enjoy the good weather, and we'll be back again next week. Bye-bye, everyone.